Pleasure to welcome everyone tonight to our shiur, and it is dedicated to the refuah shlema of Nachman ben Alta Yocheved, that is Mr. Norman Isserlis, Ariela's father, Zozan Gesund, also to the recovery of Shendel Rivka Bas Hindel, that is my son-in-law, Asher, his grandmother, Zozan Gesund, who has not been well, also Ben Zion ben Rivka and Chanoch ben Blimala as well. So hopefully this year will be a source of merit for all of them for Refuah Shlema. Our subject, of course, is the Parsha of the week, a fascinating and eventful Parsha. We'll see how far we can progress within it. So I'd like to start with very interesting insight from Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz into the first pasuk. Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak min Avraham, Avraham holides Yitzchak. So all the Mefarshim have something to say on this opening verse because of the evident tautology in it. Eila Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. These are the descendants, or maybe the events, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well, of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. And then it adds Avraham holides Yitzchak, which, as I say, is a tautology, because if you just said Yitzchak ben Avraham, which we know in any case, why does it have to add Avraham holides Yitzchak? So all of the Mefarshim, of course, draw attention to this. Rashi says, Ve'ela tolos Yitzchak, Yaakov ve'esav ha'amurim beparsha. The word toldos usually means generations or descendants, from the word laholid. But Rashi says that actually our parsha doesn't talk about the descendants of Yitzchak. I mean, it does in the sense of his two immediate descendants, Esav and Yaakov, his two sons. It doesn't talk about their progeny into future generations. And unlike some other biblical personalities, the Parsha doesn't mention generation after generation as we find in other places. So says Rashi, this refers to Yaakov ve'esav hamurim be the Parsha. So Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz has a keen insight. He says that the Torah is sensitive to the fact that people were maybe astonished or maybe even, as we'll see in a moment, cynical about the fact that Yitzchak was the father of Yaakov and Esav, two very different boys whose legacy and whose lifestyle was completely different, actually antagonistic one to the other. If Yitzchak is so righteous, Rivka is righteous, how could it be that they were the parents of Yaakov and Esav? So the answer lies in the second half of the pasuk, Avraham holides Yitzchak. So according to Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz's explanation is as follows, that Avraham had a son Yitzchak, but Avraham also had a son Yishmael. So how could it be that Avraham had two sons also that were so very different? The answer is that Avraham was very great, but his greatness, that is to say, his natural kind of predilection to spiritual prowess was not yet completely pure. It needed to be purified through the next generation. Like I've said in the past, that purification requires polarization. It's a refinement process. It's like removing the dross from gold or from silver. It requires a purging process. And excuse me, Yishmael was like the dross of Avraham. So Avraham had two sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael. So just as Avraham had Yitzchak, but of course Avraham himself was not yet perfect. That is to say, his legacy needed further refinement. So Yitzchak had two sons, Yaakov and Esav. And don't be surprised that Yitzchak had a son, Esav, because remember, Yitzchak is the son of Avraham, who, great though he was, had a certain amount of dross, we can say, that was drawn off in Ishmael. And the same happened in the case of Yitzchak also. But then he had something else as well.
Sorry, there's a fundamental difference. Ishmael was Hagar's son, but Esav and Yitzchak were both Yitzchak and Rivka.
Okay, very good point. So that he alludes to that issue as well. And of course, you're right that Esav was the product of two righteous people. So the skeptics were saying something further. They said, you know what? Yitzchak is righteous. Yitzchak, no doubt, is a very righteous person. Rivka for sure is righteous. But I wonder, said the cynics, who the father of Yitzchak really was. Because Abraham and Sarah were married for the longest time. We don't know exactly how long, but they were definitely married for many years. They were childless for all those years. Abraham had a child through Hagar, it's true, but then year after year, he again had no children. Sarah had no children for all those years. She spent one night in the palace of Avimelech, and you know what? Not long afterwards, she gave birth. So the cynics were saying, late Saneh Hador said that Avimelech was the real father of Yitzchak. And that, again, cynical point of view was lent further credence by the fact that Yitzchak was the father of Esav. So they said, where did it come, this sort of capacity, the potential to father a wicked person? It must be because Yitzchak's mother, Sarah, is righteous, but his father, who knows, maybe it was Avimelech. So regarding that, that's why Rashi says, I hope you have your Chumash, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says that in order to respond to that cynical, gossip mongering, the Torah says, Avraham holides Yitzchak, says Rashi, Tsar klaster panav shel Yitzchak, that Hashem made the visage of Yitzchak to appear just like Avraham. He was, like we say, the spitting image of his father. So everyone said Avraham holides Yitzchak. The very appearance of this boy, Yitzchak, who grew to maturity, testified to his parentage and the fact that Abraham was his father. So that's why, and that's why the Torah says it right here rather than earlier. The Torah emphasizes it here because people were saying that the kind of negativity of Yitzchak that found its expression in Esav is because he derives from Avimelech. So that says Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz, it's not so. That even though he was great, Yitzchak was great and righteous, but nevertheless, this phenomenon of purification still required an additional generation in order to be purged completely. Now, I just want to add that we are aware that great people can sometimes have children who are wayward. I say Milanu Gadol, then Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, possibly the greatest Torah figure of the 19th century, who joined Talmudic erudition with sensitivity, with insight, with a drive to transform the world, not only the world of Torah study, but the wider Jewish world as well, the father of the Musar movement. He was an inspiring personality, and on another occasion we could talk a lot more about him. He had a son who was a professor of mathematics, who became a distinguished professor in St. Petersburg. You can read about Lipkin's theorem even to this day, and that is the son of, his name was Lipkin, Salant. So even Rabbi Yisrael Salanter had a son who was wayward. And I'll tell you the truth, although I don't want to dwell on it too much, but even Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz himself had a son, Wolf Eibeschutz, who I don't want to talk too much about, but he did not add luster to the family name. So there may be a remez to that phenomenon as well. Okay, let's turn to the next pasuk. So Rivka conceives, actually a few verses later, pasuk Chaf Beis. It says that Rivka conceives and she has a difficult pregnancy. Just trying to find the pasuk. Verse 22. Ve'yisrotzezu habanim b'kirba. The two embryos were wrestling within her. They were agitating within her. Vatomar imkein lama ze anochi. And she said, "What's going on? Lama ze anochi." I wasn't going to tell you, but it's such a clever quip. I saw it elsewhere as well, but maybe Rabbi Eibeschutz is the one who innovated it. Lama ze anochi. Why does it say Anochi Hashem Elokecha? I'm the Lord your God. If I have a child within me that seeks to agitate when I pass a place of Torah study, and also seeks to like escape and to go to worship in a place of idolatry when I pass by that place. So lama ze anochi, why does it say in the 10 Commandments, Anochi Hashem Elokecha? Okay, that's just a kind of quip. But he says as follows, a question which I've often wondered about, and the Meforshim ask about Rashi as well. Vatelech lidrosh es Hashem. She went to seek God. She went for divine communication. And the next pasuk says that she received a prophecy. Hashem la, God said to her, Shnei goyim bevitnech, etc. But it is evident that this was not a direct prophecy to Rivka. I mean, probably she was on a very high level, but according to Rashi, Vatelech lidrosh, Rashi says, Leves medrasho shel Shem. She went to the study hall, to the yeshiva of Shem, maybe Shem ve'ever, according to one version as well. In other words, she sought the prophetic insight of Shem. And many wonder, why did she go all the way to Shem? Why didn't she just speak to, so I'm just adjusting my screen here a bit. Why didn't she just ask Avraham, her shver, her father-in-law? He was still alive at that time. Presumably he was local. We don't know where geographically where this yeshiva of Shem ve'ever was located. It may have been actually somewhere distant. There's evidence to suggest it was somewhere else. But at any rate, why didn't she go to Avraham? Avraham is the greatest prophet of the age, surely. So Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says something which I think is keen insight, as I know I've repeated a few times. He says that later on we find, a short while later, we find that Yitzchak is mourning for his father. The Torah doesn't say that explicitly, but it says that Yaakov was preparing nizid adashim, the pot of lentils. Esav came in from the field. He was very tired. The Medrash says that Esav was tired because he had a very busy day. He was busy with raping, pillaging, murdering. That's why he was tired. This was when the two boys were 15 years of age, according to the reckoning. And that was the day of the death, or shortly after the death of, immediately after the death of Avraham. And that's why he was preparing nizid adashim, is a pottage of lentils. Lentils are associated with mourning. The roundness symbolizes the cycle of life. And he was preparing that as a meal for his father Yitzchak, who was grieving for the death of his father Avraham. Says the Medrash, Abraham died 5 years before his time so that he would not suffer the great anguish of seeing his Einekol, Esav, Yotza letarbus Ra, who became a criminal and a heretic and an antagonist of Yaakov and all that is holy. So that's why Abraham died. It says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, if Abraham died so that he would not suffer the anguish of seeing Esav Yotze letarbus Ra, it stands to reason they're definitely not going to reveal to him min hashamayim the future as well. So essentially, he says that Rivka could not go to Abraham. Either maybe she asked Abraham and he couldn't explain it, or she realized that Abraham will never be able to explain to her. That is to say, Abraham, great prophet though he was, will not be vouchsafed this divine prophetic insight into the future, which of course the prophecy is, you have two children within you, they will go their separate ways, they will be antagonistic to one another. One is Israel, one is Edom, as we know. So therefore Abraham wasn't given that. It occurs to me that this is consistent with what we learned in last week's Parasha, actually 2 weeks ago, that Sarah was superior to Abraham in prophecy. So again, for all of Abraham's greatness, and Hashem appeared to him several times, but nevertheless, Abraham was not endowed with that particular form or that particular information regarding the future of his grandchildren. And as I say, this is reflected in the fact that Abraham died before he saw Esav Yotze letarbus Ra. And then he adds on something else as well. It's not my own quip. He says it could be that Rivka was embarrassed to say to her father-in-law that when I go past a place of idolatry, the child within me is eager to leave in order to worship. So she may not have known that she had twins at that time. There's evidence that she only discovered when that prophecy was revealed to her. So she didn't want to say to her father-in-law, that the child within me seems to have an interest in idolatry. So possibly, it was a bit too close for comfort, a bit too close, all in the family. It suited her rather to go to an outside local prophet rather than, I don't know how local he was even, but rather than Abraham. Okay, so the boys are born. As we know, Esav comes out first. Yaakov holds on to the heel of Esav. They grow to adolescence, and the Torah says, as we know, that Yitzchak was fond of Esav. In Pasuk Chaf Zayin 27, the sons, the boys, the lads grew. And Esav is a hunter, Yodei Tzayid, he knows how to hunt or to trap. Ish Sadeh, a man of the field. Yaakov Ish Tam Yeshev Ohalim, and Yaakov is the wholehearted one, the one who cultivates the life of the spirit, the life of the intellect. And Esav is the one, the Ish Sadeh. So just Derech Hagav, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says that maybe Yitzchak was attracted to Esav because he thought Esav is spending so much time in the forest, in the field. He's going out to commune with nature. He's going to meditate. He's going to pray. He's going to gain inspiration from the wonders of the natural world. And I hope you remember that this was the penchant of Yitzchak himself. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. We had that at the end of last week's parsha, towards the end of last week's parsha. So therefore, Yitzchak identified with Esav, thinking that's why he's going into the field to meditate. But what the Torah says explicitly, as for the reason why he loved him, in the next verse 28, Ve'yahav Yitzchak es Esav kitzayid befiv. Rivka says Yaakov. Rivka was partial to Yaakov, but it says clearly Yitzchak loved Esav kitzayid befiv. So tzayid means game. In other words, he trapped game. He was a hunter, and either he shot or he trapped game, probably venison or that sort of thing, and he provided for Yitzchak, his father. This is evident from later on as well, when Yitzchak says to Esav, I'd like to bless you, so go bring me some game from the field, something that I enjoy eating. However, Rashi says there's something more sinister here. Take a look at Rashi. Hope you have Rashi there. Befiv kitargumu befiv shel Yitzchak. That's the initial explanation of Rashi. Umed Rasho, and the homiletic explanation is befiv shel Esav, that Esav trapped Yitzchak with his mouth. Shayatzad oso umar ehu umuramehu bidvarav. He trapped his father and he deceived him with his mouth. Kitzayid befiv. He trapped his father. He, as I say, deceived him with his mouth. Now, Rashi doesn't elaborate further because Rashi, as we know, is coming to explain Pshuto Shel Mikra, the simple understanding. And the simple understanding here is weak because why should Yitzchak love Esav just because he brought him food? Surely Rivka would provide for him as well. At any rate, the Medrash does tell us how he trapped his father. What did he say that made his father think, my son Esav, he's so devout, he's so pious, he's so righteous, he seeks spiritual improvement always. I'm so proud of him, I love him. What did he say? So Rashi, as I said, alludes to it. The Targum, the Medrash Tanchuma says that Esav would have an affectation of extreme religious devotion, and he would say to his father, Hayech ma'asrenes hateven, hayech ma'asrenes hamelach. How does one take tithe from straw? How does one take tithe from salt? Now, the simple understanding is that these are two types of products, not exactly agricultural products. I mean, the teven, the straw is, the salt, it's not an agricultural product, but it's something which is valuable, which is useful. And he wanted to know, how does one separate tithes from it? These are not liable to tithing. The mitzvah of maaser does not apply to them at all. And of course, Esav would have known that, but he asked those questions to his father to make him appear in his father's eyes to be very righteous. So some have explanations about what's the symbolism. Why did he ask him about straw and salt in particular? Some beautiful explanations that I have seen, which are a bit homiletic. But Rav Yonatan Eibeschutz has an approach which actually I think is, if not exactly the pshat, but I think it's very keen and probably, as I say, a bit midrashic, but I like it very much. Kitzayid b'fiv, he says that Esav was not a religious man. He was not a believer. He did not accept the idea of reward in the world to come. He didn't believe in the world to come. He was the man of Olam Hazeh. That's why we'll see shortly. He says, "Ha'iteni min ha'adom hazeh." Give me some of this red stuff. Red. And he was called red. And he came out of the womb like with a mantle of red hair. He was all about red. Red is the most eye-catching color. That's why stop signs are red. That's why the lady in red is wearing red. And that's why there's such a thing as a red light district, because red is the color that catches the eye. It's the symbol of superficiality. It's the symbol of that which is nira le'einayim, which is apparent to the eye, because Esav is all about olam hazeh, about this world. So therefore, the mitzvahs which bring reward in the next world had little interest for Esav. There's one exception. There's one mitzvah for which a person is promised reward in this world, and that is the mitzvah of ma'aser, of tithing. Like it says, aser ta'aser, and the famous drash the Gemara mentions is aser kidei lihit asher. Take ma'aser, that is to say, separate a tenth, give generously so that you will become wealthy. And the pasuk even says, "Bechanuni na bezos." Test me with this. One is not allowed to test God with mitzvahs, with one exception. When it comes to tzedakah, one is allowed to. Bechanuni na bezos. So Esav said, "That's great. This I like. This I appeals to me. If I can benefit from this mitzvah in Olam Hazeh, then that's great. That's what I'm going to do." So the other mitzvahs didn't interest him, but the mitzvah of Maaseh, he was very fond of that. So that's why he asked his father about, can I give Maaseh from straw, from salt? The more I give, the more I get. That I like. So therefore, Esav was able to deceive his father in this way. And it occurred to me that maybe this is also why, or at least a partial reason why, Esav excelled in the mitzvah of Kibud Av. The Gemara even says that Esav was a paradigm for honoring his father. Maybe his mother a bit less so, but definitely he honored his father. And he is regarded by the sages as an exemplar in that regard. Maybe this is a partial explanation as to why, because as we know, the Torah says, Lema'an ya'arichun yamecha, that regarding the mitzvah of honoring one's parents, also he is rewarded with length of days in this world. So maybe that's part of the reason why Esav was fond of that mitzvah, because
although it's specifically mentioned in his mitzvah for which you get reward in Olam Haba. It's like one of the specific ones that
well, it's true. The Gemara in Chulin says that it doesn't necessarily mean length of days in this world, because unfortunately there are people who may honor their parents and sadly die at prematurely. So you're right, Tali, that the Gemara interprets it to mean ba'olam haba. But Esav may have taken it at face value and he thought, well, maybe this one I'll benefit from in this world as well. But maybe that's why Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz doesn't add that. That's just my own thought. I even had occurred to me something else as well about Shiloh HaKain. Maybe that's he was in the forest all the time looking for birds' nests to find, because that's also the other mitzvah about which the Torah says that one is rewarded with length of days. But okay, Tali, you're probably right. Esav was more learned than that, and he realized that's only an olam haba, so it doesn't help him. But about maaser bechanuni nabazos. Okay, let's turn a few verses further, and we find right away that Yaakov is preparing food. We said before, nizid adashim, lentils, And Esav comes from the field, v'hu ayef, and he's tired. We said already why he's tired. He's had a busy day. V'yomer Esav el Yaakov hal iteni, so it's pasuk lamen. Hal iteni min na min ha'adom hazeh. Give me some of this red stuff. Ki ayef anochi. I'm very tired. That's why they called him Edom. So Yaakov says, Machra kayomes b'choras chali. Sell me your birthright. So Esav responds as follows in Pasuk Lamed Beis 32. V'yomei Esav hine anochi holech lamus. Behold, I'm going to die. V'lama ze li b'chora. And why do I need this birthright? We said Esav is all about olam hazeh. He says, lama zeh li b'chara. It's not something tangible. It's not something immediate. It's not something I can feel or gives me pleasure or even satiation. The birthright doesn't do any of those things for me. Lama zeh li b'chara. I'm all about zeh, olam hazeh, if it's here. But I'm going to die. Now, of course, at the very superficial level, one could understand this to mean that Esav is suggesting I'm going to die of hunger. So the birthright is not of relative importance. My hunger and my fear of death right now is more urgent. If that's the case, of course, it's a bit exploitative of Yaakov to take advantage of his brother in that way, and probably some readers of the text may imagine that to be the case. It's very unlikely that that was really his intention, meaning that he was saying he was going to die of hunger, even though superficially one might think that's what it's all about. The Mefarshim, though, Rashbam, Radak, Ibn Ezra, say the following. Actually, I just want to mention Rashbam, who I'm sure you remember was the grandson of Rashi, one of my favorites. So Rashi's grandson was called Rabbeinu Shmuel ben Meir. This is one of the only places in his commentary where he quotes his father. His father was called Meir. His father was a Talmid of Rashi, probably a distinguished Talmid of Rashi, if he married the daughter of Rashi. And Rashbam quotes his father in this regard. What the meaning was, I'm going to die before my father, because I've got a dangerous profession. I'm a hunter, I'm a trapper. I'm out in the forest with the lions, with the mountain lions, with the bears, with the other wild animals. Probably I'm going to die before my father anyway. If I die before my father, the birthright is worth zilch because I'm never going to cash it in. It's only something which I'm going to get in the future. I'm probably going to predecease my father anyway. That's what the Mefarshim say al derech hapshat. Of course, Rashi says, also, not that the intention of I'm going to die immediately, but Rashi says that this Bechora, this birthright, the birthright, of course, wasn't just a matter for them, wasn't just a matter of money, of cash, of value. Actually, Ibn Ezra suggests that probably he lost his wealth. Maybe Yitzchak he inherited from his father, but he wasn't necessarily lucky with his property portfolio. The Cave of Machpelah probably didn't throw off that much dividends, and the other investments, maybe they went south. And maybe he wasn't wealthy. That's what Ibn Ezra suggests. But others question whether that could be the case. But at any rate, the true meaning of the birthright, of course, is to be the next link in the chain. Avraham, Yitzchak, Esav. That was the sort of Hava Amina. That's the significance of being the firstborn. That's what it could have meant. But the problem is that if he's going to be a Bechor, and as we know originally, before the Kohanim were selected, the tribe of Levi was elevated, the role of the priests of the Kohanim in the Jewish nation went to the Bechorim, to the firstborn. So Esav thought, what is the role of the firstborn? What is the role? I mean, according to this original plan, he's going to be the one to do the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash. But says Rashi, the problem with that is kama azharos va'onshimu misos tluyin ba. There are so many ways that I can be liable to the death penalty if I'm going to do the avoda. For example, shesuya yayin. If I go into the Beis Hamikdash when I'm drunk, for a kohen that is, then I'm liable to the death penalty, bidei shamayim, and other things as well. So therefore, Esav said, I'm not interested in it. Because of the Bechora. Lama zeli Bechora. This Bechora is not an asset to me, it's a liability. I want to offload it. I'm keen to get rid of it. because of the Bechorah. So that's what Rashi says. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz takes it a bit deeper. And he says, you know what? Esav, as we know, and the Torah describes Esav, we just discussed it a few minutes ago, was outwardly pious. He was able to deceive his father. Now, his father, maybe his vision was not that acute. We know later on his eyesight was impaired, but we don't know that that was the case. Even at a younger age, perhaps it was, according to one opinion in Rashi. But he was able to deceive his father. And the truth is, although even in our discussion tonight, we've embellished it with some midrashic, rabbinic, interpretations, but the actual text of the Torah itself does not reveal Esav as such a thug or a villain or a scoundrel. The actual text of the Torah can be understood in a more benign way. The point is that Esav, superficially, was worthy. His corruption was not obvious to the casual viewer. Excuse me, perhaps Rivka understood, but many others did not. Esav thought, you know what? Insofar as playing the role of the religious man, when it suits me, I can do that. The problem is that a Kohen, if his intent is flawed, then he's also liable to punishment. And we find a very compelling example of this, Eibeschutz brings, Nadav va'Avihu. They were righteous, but they went into the Beis HaMikdash, into the Mishkan at the time, with intention that was flawed in some way. They weren't supposed to be there, or it was unauthorized, another number of possibilities, but they paid a heavy price for it. Esav thought, if that's what happens to them, I'm going to get the same punishment. Even Korach and his cohorts also, they did a small amount of the avoda with the incense, and they all suffered a terrible fate, because their intention, their purpose in challenging the leadership of Moshe was self-serving. Esav thought, this Bechorah, the consequences or the burden of the Bechorah is too intense for me. It occurred to me also, he doesn't say this, but it occurred to me that Esav is associated with the chazir, with the pig. And as we say in Yiddish, chazer hata kasher fissel. Chazir is the only animal that has one sign of a kosher animal and one sign of a non-kosher animal, in which the kosher sign is the split hooves. There are other animals that chew the cud but do not have split hooves, like a camel and many others. But the pig is the only animal that has split hooves and does not chew the cud. When a pig sleeps, its feet protrude as if to say, look how kosher I am, I've got split hooves. So this symbolizes someone who is outwardly pious but inwardly corrupt. Esav thought the Bechorah is only going to do me in because my inner corruption will be exposed in the heavenly court. And someone who does the avoda, if he is even inwardly corrupt, he's going to pay a heavy price for it. So this is a liability for me and not something which is beneficial at all. I'd just like to end with a final thought extending this, and that is that the Bechorah that Esav spurned, and it says clearly, Vayivez Esav es ha-Bechorah, there's a tragedy which I would like to extend a little bit in terms of my interpretation, and that is Esav was given by fate or by destiny the birthright. He emerged from the womb first. He had the potential, therefore, to claim that birthright in principle and to be worthy of it and to aspire to grow into the greatness that was thrust upon him. And Esav declined to do so. Esav, it was a poverty of self-belief. Esav thought, this Bechorah, it's only going to be to my detriment. I'm not going to benefit from it. I can't live up to it. I can't grow into it. I can't aspire to it. It's going to meet my downfall. And tragically, how many Jewish people have an attitude which is not that much dissimilar? When they learn a bit, or maybe they've been introduced, maybe they've even grown up in an environment which exposes them to the beauty of the Torah, but also to the expectations of the Torah. You know what? That's not for me. and they walk away from something which is so glorious, which is so precious and so priceless, because they thought, I'm not worthy of it. It doesn't jive with me. I can't live up to it, and therefore it's not an asset for me. For me, it's a liability. This is a tragedy of Esav, and I think it's a lesson which may be applicable to all of us as well in one way or another. Thank you very much, and I wish you Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are any questions
Good
or
Shabbos.
comments, good Shabbos to one and all. If there are any questions, happy
Good
to
Shabbos.
entertain.
Thank you very much.
Good Shabbos. Thank you.
Rav, that was
Just one question actually, Rabbi Simon, is if Esav is viewed as sort of being a sort of a model of honoring his father, but how can one say he does when he effectively deceives his father? He's not really honoring it. He's like pretending to honor him rather than.
That's a very good point. I mean, according to our understanding, that it was really self-serving, and in a way, he was, like you say, deceiving his father for his own betterment, his own interests. But I suppose, sometimes.